There's no doubt that Americans are more polarized than ever before. Many liberals are quick to call Trump a fascist, and many conservatives think nothing of calling Democrats baby killers. But in the wake of Charlie Kirk's assassination, many are questioning if we've gone too far, and if our moral indignation hasn't crossed a line into dangerous demonization. Dr. Anthony Bradley, a Christian scholar and research professor at Kuiper College, posted this the day Charlie was killed. Charlie Kirk's assassination is straight out of this Haidt book. If you believe that people are evil, it justifies eliminating evil by any means necessary, which includes death. Haidt predicted this because Americans demonize those with whom they disagree. But this disturbing trend of demonizing others isn't just between Democrats and Republicans. We see this between the many tribes in the church, between fundamentalists and charismatics, reformed and non-reformed, or even between those who support my work and those who don't.
Enough is enough with people consuming the demonic evil content that Julie Roys puts out and attacking others.
Is there a tie between dehumanizing language and harmful actions? And if so, how should we as Christians engage with both those who hate us and with those whose behavior we despise? Welcome to the Roys Report, a podcast dedicated to reporting the truth and restoring the church. I'm Julie Roys. Well, joining me today is Paul Coughlin, an author, speaker, and founder of the Protectors, an anti-bullying organization. He's also a friend of the Roys Report and spoke at our Restore conference in 2022. So, Paul, welcome. It's a pleasure to speak with you again.
No, great to be with you again. Thank you.
Well, Paul, you reached out to me shortly after Charlie Kirk's assassination, and you really wanted to speak into this cultural moment. Would you explain why you're so concerned with what you're seeing right now?
Well, given the background that we have with bullying, I've been an expert witness in legal cases, and we've been battling bullying for over 20 years now. And you just can't help but see the similarities between violent rhetoric and eventually some people deciding that the other person deserves to be treated poorly because they are fill in the blank, that person is not just wrong in what they believe, but that person is actually evil. And in doing so, unfortunately, we've seen the script too many times. And the hope is that perhaps with this podcast, we can kind of lower the temperature by showing the connection between horrible rhetoric and horrible actions.
So often it seems like with bullying, we think of the target of the bullying doing harm to themselves. But right now, what we're seeing is the target of the bullying becoming a target of others who are hearing this hateful rhetoric. It's so easy to think, hey, those are just words, right? They're just words, and we can use this inflammatory language. It's not really going to lead to actions. There's a big difference between actions and words. And you see, plenty of people who use really inflammatory language who would never think of crossing that line into behavior. But what you're saying is when that happens, something is often happening in the audience who's watching this, who's listening to the bully, that they're beginning to say, this person is somehow less than. This person is not somebody, and as Christians, believing that this is somebody made in the image of God, whether we agree with your behavior or not.
Indeed, yeah. It's kind of like a dog whistle that goes out to some of these people. Not everyone takes the inflammatory, hyperbolic language and decides to do something horrible with it. But it's clear that there are people who hear this rhetoric over time where it triggers something in them, it pushes them over the edge. Some of these people tend to be fairly narcissistic, so it's an opportunity for them to make a name for themselves, even though it's infamous and it's horrible. So there are just people who are slightly unhinged that when they continue to hear this rhetoric and maybe naive enough to believe it, that the ultimate answer is to, get rid of that person. Julie, most people, unless they're a psychopath or a sociopath, In order to harm another person, we have to convince ourselves that they deserve to be harmed. And it's bullying 101, where demeaning words, why we take away a person's name and we replace it with demeaning words over and over and over. And in doing so, the perpetrator actually convinces themselves of the rightness of their cause. It almost always starts with words, which you mentioned earlier. They're just words. Well, yes, but no. At the same time, they carry so much power, particularly for a certain kind of person.
And you mentioned when we discussed this prior to actually recording this podcast that there was a link between the Rwandan genocide and words. And for those who might be listening who are younger than 40, 45, you may not be that familiar with it, but this was absolutely horrific, where 800,000 to 1 million people lost their lives because of this sort of tribal warfare between Tutsis and Hutu. This was in the 1994 that this happened. I think it was just a 100-day period, right? That was between these two groups that had like a long-standing animosity, but they had lived together, as far as I understand, peaceably for the most part. I mean, nothing on this level. What is it that triggered this really, really violent reaction in a group of people?
Yeah, there was long simmering disagreements between the two. And I think really relative to what we're talking about here is the use of language again between the warring groups. One group began to refer, the group in power referred to the other group as cockroaches. It started on a radio broadcast, for example, and then it came down to a kind of 10 commandments on behalf of the powerful group, more powerful group, to really shun the other group. And, you hear the word cockroach and you just can't help but think that they most likely borrowed that language from the Nazis toward the Jews, who were referred to as vermin and cockroaches. And we look back, for example, when the Nazis began to persecute Jews, they actually thought initially they would receive a lot more pushback. So they started out with this horrible propaganda of name calling. They thought people would push back more, but they didn't. And as a result, it just emboldened them. And you have to think that there in Rwanda, we were scheduled to talk about the connection between bullying and genocide, but that was just before COVID, so the conference got canceled. But you got to think that the connections between the two are profound. And I think we're seeing aspects of it today in what I would describe as a growingly coarsening society in America. I mean, Julie, you and I aren't that old. There was a time where you just wouldn't accept.
Depends on who's talking,
Yeah,
right?
right.
The perspective. To my parents, I really am that old.
Oh
but,
my!
Did I say parents? To my children, I really am that old as their parents.
Yeah, but there was a time we wouldn't tolerate this horrible language. So we would be. It really be a kind of a shaming thing. You just wouldn't talk that way about another person. But that has gone out the window, and I think that. I think the church should lead it. I mean, we lead in getting back to decency and toward one another and hospitality. We're sure we can disagree with one another, but at the same time retain the humanity of each other as well.
When you say cockroach, the first thing that came to my mind was my friend now, Laura Lynn Tyler Thompson, who's a podcaster. And when she and I both were reporting on misconduct at Daystar TV, they called one of the executives there called her a clickbait cockroach. Wow. And they were calling me, I think, a low-level blogger and some other not too nice things. But at the time, like, she made a joke out of it and she made a meme out of, being a clickbait cockroach and everything. But it was just horrific language. And for a Christian television network and an executive there to use that kind of language towards not even another believer, a sister or brother in Christ. I mean, this is shocking. And yet, we who are in the media and those of us who have been speaking out against corruption and abuse in the church, the language that's used, I mean, accuser of the brethren, Jezebel, we're called satanic, we're called demonic, we're called daughters of Satan. In fact, that's become a joke now too. We call it daughters of Stan because somebody in their X post left the A out of out of Satan, so it became daughters of Stan. But I mean, the language within the church right now, and it can be, we've become so tribalistic, so it can be. I mean, it can be just that you have a slight difference in your theology, but that's enough to make you less than, to make you demonic. I mean, it's just gotten so out of hand.
Yeah, it has. I mean, you and I have both been attacked. I was saying previously, I was called an agent of the devil for one of the books that I had written, received death threats for that book. And I think I can enlighten our audience as to, though that is such a unbelievable way to speak about another person. How can someone do that? I'll tell you why. In most cases, most of the case, in regard to bullies, is bullies believe they're superior to other people. They do not suffer from low self-esteem. They have excessive self-esteem. They are full of hubris. They are special. They are above the herd. So they don't have to follow the same rules as others because they are especially anointed, whatever term you want to use. And therefore, what they say is what God wants. And if people go against them, then they're going against God. And this is really how they think and feel. So for them to use horrible names, name calling, for example, if you were to give them a shot of sodium pentothal, they would say, well, they deserve it. They deserve to be treated this way. They are cockroaches. They are, to some degree, subhuman because they are just so big and wonderful. That's how they view themselves.
And this is what was just so depraved in the aftermath of Charlie Kirk's assassination, were people gloating on TikTok, were people celebrating. And it was, I mean, I don't care what you think about Charlie Kirk. No human being's murder at the hand of another human being, I mean, should ever be celebrated. And some people put these up on social media because they're like, I know a lot of people are saying this didn't happen. Listen, and I listened to just 2 or 3 of them, and it was enough to just make me sick to my stomach. But to be able to do that and think you're morally justified, so much so that you'd put it out there and you're not afraid of the repercussions, because they weren't getting repercussions. And that's where, and I'm seeing it right now too, in what's happening with the rise of anti-Semitism. And again, I don't care what you think about what's happening, in the Middle East right now. I mean, there's no doubt that what happened on October 7th was horrific. There's no doubt that the death of innocent Gazans is horrific as well. But to turn that against a group of people because of their ethnicity or their religion, what I'm seeing with Jews, I just never thought I would see this in my lifetime. I've said to Neil, I'm like, when did it become socially acceptable to be anti-Semitic in America? Because that's what I'm hearing and that's what I'm seeing. And it's absolutely shocking, Paul. I never thought I would see this day in the United States of America.
Yeah, well, you're bringing me back to my college years, and I remember seeing blatant anti-Semitism among students, and even by some of my professors. I remember in the late 80s, some professors referring to Reagan as a Nazi and as his administration as a regime. So this is, I've been used to it since the late 80s that pretty much any conservative figure, on a larger scale, has been referred to in this real demonizing language. So it's been a long time coming. It just, in my opinion, it seems to have bubbled out in a more public way, probably starting within higher education. Unfortunately, it's been my experience.
But it just seems what I've seen demonizing language. What I haven't seen is, this is racist. I thought in America that would never be allowed again. And so that's what's shocking to me. Conservatives, liberals, whatever, I'm used to that kind of demonizing language, but absolute outright racism, being okay because the person's Jewish. I mean, this is where, again, it's shocking to me. It is a sign of the times, perhaps.
Yeah, and I think probably the case there is that the vast majority don't like it and don't believe in it. What I think is pretty shocking is that people are doing what you said, is they're actually proclaiming, they're publishing it in a way that they just wouldn't have done it before. And there has been some pushback, obviously. People have been losing their jobs in regard to Charlie Kirk, in regard to the things they said about that. You know, that's been phrased, unfortunately, or framed in a free speech issue. And I don't quite get that, because it's not like the government has come after people and having them lose their jobs. These are like employers who are saying, you know what, that's beyond the pale. You're going to have coworkers who feel you're a dangerous person, and maybe so. So it hasn't been necessarily a government crackdown. It has been an employment issue. There is such a thing as faulty hiring. And I would say to people who seem to be okay with these horrible memes about Charlie Kirk, well, imagine your favorite politician or political figure had been assassinated, and your coworker celebrated. Would you want to work alongside that person? I think for most people, most of the time, they would say, no way. It should. I don't want to work with that person.
And yet, here's the hypocrisy, I think, of some of it is. I published several articles in the wake of Charlie Kirk's death. And honestly, a lot of people think I have like these strong political axes to grind. I've seen it on social media, and it's kind of humorous to me. Not really humorous anymore. There's times when it's funny because it's so off. It's like the disconnect. But at the same time, this is why I'm not political anymore. It is. I mean, I used to be very political, but then I saw the way the demonizing works. And it's a way of basically saying that your opponent has no credibility. And so it's unfair. It's not, and it really is. It's the lowest form of argumentation is ad hominem argument, right? Just name calling. It's like when you run out of being able to engage in dialogue, like then you just go to this. So again, I didn't have an axe to grind. Charlie, some of the things he said, I'll be honest, were cringy to me. Some of it I didn't like. There's other things he said where he was saying things where, a lot of people felt like that needed to be said. And I can see how conservatives felt like, well, finally somebody had the guts to say some things. How I feel about it doesn't really matter. I didn't even write these articles, but we were just reporting in real time as the news was coming out. We're learning things about the shooter in real time. And we learned that his parents, for example, were Mormon, and that Charlie had just praised Mormons right before he got shot. And we found out that he had been raised in a very conservative background. That didn't mean he was conservative. This was just a fact about his upbringing. So we reported an article on that, and the usual haters came after me saying, I couldn't believe the things that were said because we reported a factual article with real-time stuff that was coming out. And then, as it came out that he had put on some anti-fascist rhetoric on the ammunition he was using, we reported that. But people, the amount of vitriol, and it's like we don't learn. Like we can see that that by demonizing people, and again, I don't know all of the ins and outs. We may never know all of the motivations of this particular shooter. But the fact that we engage in such hateful rhetoric about each other, I mean, this is inter-family squabble in a way, because we're talking Christians here, and the way that we're treating each other in the wake of this, that was just so disturbing to me. I mean, it was, and I'm used to, I get a lot of stuff. I do. In fact, the mug, this is a mug that I have right now. You probably can't see it there, but anyway, my mug, it was given to me by another investigative journalist. He used to work for the Tribune, but he's a Christian and he's been following my work, and he actually helps me out with editing sometimes. But he wrote it to me because he actually put this on a mug. I'm sorry, and it's Julie Roys is a divisive dingbat who relishes in causing division in the church, and then he goes on, and then at the end he says, plus she's a bitch. That's my mug. This is from this is what journalists send each other. But I mean, in a way, you know, it's a joke between journalists when you get hate mail like that, because and a journalism professor said, Julie, if you're not getting any hate mail, you're probably just not saying anything.
Yeah,
but again,
well, you should sell that as merchandise. That should be, you put your picture on.
Oh, I've thought of doing. I remember when James McDonald called me a gossip slut and a gossip whore. I had a buddy reach out to me and said, "Oh, please let me have the merchandise." He's like, "I've got the T-shirt, hashtag whatever on the back." But we make fun of it, right? And we joke at it, and sometimes that's to keep your sanity because it's so toxic what's happening right now. But that in the wake of, what happened to Charlie was so, if you don't hurt for him and you don't hurt for his family, then something is wrong with you. Something is deeply wrong with you. And I did hurt for him, but I could not believe that Christians, that this is how they responded, not to mention their beautiful responses as well. Beautiful responses. And there are people that are going to church, apparently moved by the memorial service. Whatever you thought of the memorial service, the fact is that some people saw and heard things about Christianity that made them want to go to church. So, but again, this is the environment, Paul. What do we do with this?
Well, I wanted to say that a friend of mine lives in the Kirk complex, and Charlie's kids pet their dog in the elevator fairly regularly. And a friend of mine was there. Do you remember the day that Erica spoke from the headquarters
100%,
from Charlie's? Yeah. Well, that day she went back to the complex, and there was a special little meeting there. It was part homily, part worship service, and obviously there are people mourning. And buddy of mine, I say he's faith friendly, and he was actually allowed to go into the meeting, and he said he was like 6 feet away from Erica. And after that experience, I have to tell you, I would say he was godsmacked. He had never seen anything like that in his life. So it was a very special time for him, and I'm glad that he had shared that. I do want to talk to people who, and I have friends who demonize people from both sides. And I want to talk about the spiritual danger of that, what comes with that. When we put ourselves in a position of ultimate judgment, I think when we're told, do not judge, let you be judged. It's interesting. I think there should be a big footnote there, because we're told that only fools don't judge. So it really depends what kind of judgment you're talking about. And it might be better off saying, do not provide ultimate condemnation. That might be the better way to go, because all judgment is not bad. Lack of judgment can be bad as well. So I think in the Hebrew Testament and the New Testament, both forbid a kind of ultimate judgment upon the soul of another person, an ultimate verdict. That's up to God and God alone. When we think we can do that to another person, let's be honest, it's electrifying. It is wonderful to think that I am on the side of right. And I can tell you with the first book I wrote about the dangers of conspiracy theories within the church, especially end times conspiracy theories, good night. The people who held on to these end times conspiracy theories, what was remarkable was how glib and cavalier they were. They were absolutely convinced that they were on the side of right, and that if anyone disagreed with them, they were on the side of evil. And I have to tell you, for people who don't frame the world that way, let me tell you how those people really think about themselves. They think they're amazing. They think they've got it all figured out, and everyone else is a dupe. And I could use other words for how they actually think of other people. They'll say things like, well, you're not listening to the Holy Spirit, or maybe the Holy Spirit isn't even in you. I've had that said many times when you question these irresponsible Bible prophecy teachings. So they are electrifying, and they make you think that you are smarter than pretty much everyone else. Be very careful, because I'll tell you, from having written that book, you're not any smarter than anyone else. In fact, you were a dupe. You got taken. Whether or not they will admit that is another story. But there is this arrogance that comes from this view that is very dangerous, not just for our society, but for our individual souls.
And as you mentioned that, I had mentioned something at the very beginning, and that was an ex-post that went out by Anthony Bradley, citing this Jonathan Haidt book called The Righteous Mind. And I was so intrigued by that and the relevance to this situation right now that I went looking, and I found this interview. The interview is actually 13 years old, so it was in 2012, and it was Bill Moyer interviewing Jonathan Haidt. And I would love to play the whole interview. It's fascinating, but I just picked out a clip here that I think states a lot of what you're stating, and also draws a distinction between sort of healthy tribalism, if you want to call it. I don't think tribalism is ever healthy. Healthy maybe being on a team and rooting for a team, and where it crosses over into sort of that toxic, dangerous kind of rhetoric.
In analyzing any social situation, you have to understand moral psychology. Our moral sense really evolved to bind groups together into teams that can cooperate in order to compete with other teams. So some situations will sort of ramp up that tribal us versus them mentality. Nothing gets us together like a foreign attack, and we've seen that at 9/11 in Pearl Harbor. Conversely, when there are moral divisions within the group and no external attack, the tribalism can ramp up and reach really pathological proportions, and that's where we are now.
So, but it's sort of a tradition to divide into teams, the Giants versus the Patriots, the Republicans versus the Democrats, us versus them. Is almost something un-American to suggest that there's something wrong with that?
No, our groupishness is generally actually good. A lot of research in social psychology shows that when you divide people into teams to compete, they love their in-group members a lot more, and the hostility towards out-group members is usually minimal. So sports competitions, I'm at a big football school, UVA,
University of Virginia,
and the other team comes. There's some pseudo-aggression in the stands, hostile motions, but that night there aren't bar fights when everybody's drinking together downtown. That's the way sort of healthy, normal, groupish tribalism works. But the tribalism evolved ultimately for war, and when it reaches a certain intensity, that's when the switches flip. The other side is evil. They're not just our opponents, they're evil. And once you think they're evil, then the ends justify the means. And you can break laws and you can do anything because it's in the service of fighting evil.
Thoughts on that?
What he said. what he said. And I think maybe for you and me, maybe relative to other people, is given the work that we've done for a long time, we really have seen a mindset and a rhetoric that is repeated over and over and over to the point where we really do see that connection between rhetoric and violent behavior. And I guess there comes a point that our audience just have to take our word for it and other people's word for it. Yes, there is this huge connection that helps people get over this innate difficulty of wanting to harm another person. But boy, that rhetoric just gets them over that hump to some very evil means.
Well, and I often see the rhetoric used to justify the unjustifiable, right? So a lot of the rhetoric, when it's coming against me, is normally because I'm exposing somebody's misconduct, somebody's abuse. And so it's like, if they can demonize the messenger, then what I'm saying must not be true. It doesn't need to be taken seriously. But yeah, it gets the point of, and there are, I hate to say this, there's also, since I've been in this space too, I notice that there are bad actors, and that the bad actors tend to group together. And so, when you see something coming out of a certain group, then you say, oh, here we go again. This is what they do. They protect each other as they do their bad actions, right? We've seen it, and we do see those groups. And so there is a sense to which I think there's an awake group of people who see this, and it is wicked. There's wickedness happening in the church. It's happening under the guise of Christianity. It's concerning, very concerning. And yet somehow we can, I've always tried to make the distinction between the person and the action. So I can call your action evil. I can call what you're doing wrong, but I can also say, that you're not necessarily all bad because you did a bad action, or because even you have a pattern of bad action. That, again, I can kind of draw that distinction, and I try to never call people names or people, evil, although there are evil people sometimes.
There indeed are. And I think, for example, we're talking about some of the church leaders and how they band together and really defending each other in some pretty awful ways. What is eye-opening to many people, and at first I don't think they want to believe it, but the fact is many of these people are doing horrible things. They know it, and they're going to continue to do it, even though it is completely wrong. And one of the reasons why they will continue in this horrible behavior, I mentioned it earlier and it's worth repeating, it's because they think they're special. They think they are above everyone else. Therefore, other people deserve to be treated in a horrible way. Or rather, because they're special, the rules don't apply to them.
Yeah.
They're doing this amazing work, but those rules apply to other people, but they don't apply to them. I saw that up close once when I was the program director of a Christian radio station, and a church bought the radio station, and I attended the church at the time, and I heard "Gentle Jesus, Meek and Mild" on Sunday, and I saw some of the most ruthless behavior on Monday by the same people. It is it's more than hypocrisy. The ideals of Christianity are so high, no one can live up to them, right? So one can always say, yeah, we're all hypocrites. And I think there's some truth to that. We're not all frauds. Frauds are very different. Most of us are like, oh, I've made a mistake. I shouldn't have done that. You repent. These guys are like, They never intended to follow it in the first place, though they pretend that they do. And for those of us, you and I, when we've kind of seen that side of misery, or of ministry rather, we've seen something we can't unsee. When we eat, we've eaten from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and every time we eat from that tree, you can't help but get indigestion. So I still have indigestion from seeing the behind the scenes behavior of people that I once admired. If more people had a chance to see that, their eyes would be open more, and they would realize what we're talking about is real and true, and more so, or even more importantly, hopefully cleansing, that we can bring a real change, a real redemptive spirit to Julie, almost every week you put out information. It's like you could just fill in different names in different organizations. It's like the same abuse by the same people who use the same tired arguments to get out of trouble. When are we going to wait? The scripture tells us not to be naive. When are we going to get over the sin of naivete and begin to see things clearly? Because there's only so much we can do in exposing this abuse. People will still give money to these people, and they need to stop. Maybe someday we'll be held accountable for the things we supported. And I hope that's not the case, but we need to wake up. We need to wisen up.
Well, and it's interesting that you put this connection between pride and almost an elevation of self. because I've noticed the arrogance. I hate to say it because I hate to speak ill of the dead, but I mean, John MacArthur, I had people close to him who said he never apologized. I never heard him apologize. And some of the things he said, that pride, that hubris, James MacDonald, same thing. And his disdain for people actually led to physical violence. It doesn't surprise me that he broke a woman's femur. People told me, Julie, watch out. He's violent. And they said, he thinks he's better than everybody else. He's always the smartest person in the room. But we've seen it with now at Daystar, Joni Lamb, the way she talks about people, looks down her nose. I mean, it was really interesting how she puffed herself up in some of these secret recordings that we got of her, where she talked about how much she knows, and then we were like, wait, how much biblical training does she have? None. Like she has, I have more biblical training than she does. I went to a college where I had to get 14 hours of Bible training. I mean, that's what was required. But and then you have the people who are the prophetic, which I'm not saying, I'm not anti-charismatic. In fact, I lean charismatic, but the hubris that you think you can get up and hear directly from God and hear it perfectly. And then your followers will think they're hearing it perfectly and tout these things. Again, that all leads to this toxic environment of being better, of being good, and the others being evil. And man, when that happens, it is a recipe for verbal violence, but how scary when it actually goes over into physical violence.
Let me speak to that. I just want to go back to narcissism again. These are characteristics of a narcissist, and you will never get clean water from a dirty well. You will never get clean water from a narcissist, and here's why. They overestimate their own thinking. They think they're amazing. What comes out of their mouth is brilliant, when in reality, what often comes out of their mouth is charisma, not necessarily wisdom, but they say it with such charisma that, especially when you're younger, you just don't quite hear it. You don't quite get it. And what they'll say about a narcissist, and most bullies are narcissists, they're very good for about 20 minutes in a conversation. And for most of these leaders, they don't meet that many people longer than 20 minutes, right? So they make a really good first impression. But after that, they are really, really among the most disliked people in any gathering. Unfortunately, it takes time to see the ugly side of them, and they're pretty smart. They're not going to let people, at least publicly, see that side of them. They'll do it behind doors, but publicly they don't do it. So there's even more of the ruse is that you have this wonderful wholesome appearance there on the stage, and then they behave so differently behind the scenes that people just can't believe it, but they need to believe it. You're never going to get narcissists overestimate their own abilities, their own thinking, and they're not giving people wisdom. They're not. They're actually harming people in many ways.
Let's talk about solutions. I mean, we are Christians. We do believe in absolute good, absolute evil. And we do believe that we know the truth, right? I mean, that is part of being a Christian. So how can we, as Christians who do have convictions, who do believe that we see things clearly, although if we don't think that we can't be wrong on something, this is why whenever I talk about end times things, I'm like, I'm just reminded in scripture that every single time when a prophecy came true, nobody got it in the moment. Like nobody was expecting Jesus when Jesus came to look like Jesus, right? And so I just remember that, that we need to keep a certain amount of humility in the way that we hold our convictions. But point us to some solutions that we can have so that we don't become part of this toxic soup that we're swimming in.
Yeah, indeed. Go back to what I said earlier in regard to judgment and condemnation. We are forbidden to provide ultimate condemnation for an individual, to speak that over another person. But the Hebrew Testament and New Testament both do that. And as a person who was pretty bullied when I was younger, I've had that ultimate condemnation. And there's a reason why you're not supposed to do it, because it goes deep into a person's soul. We can agree to disagree with people. We can disagree forcefully. But we are not allowed as believers to ultimately condemn another person in their character in regard to who they are. In regard to the anti-bullying work we do, what's really important is we keep a person's name sacred. And we don't really think that much about our names, right? We were given it to us for something like that. Every once in a while, our parent tells us, okay, well, you're named after this person, and this is the reason. My parents are Irish immigrants, so I was named after a Catholic priest from Dublin who went to China. He was tortured there in China and came back to the States, or rather Ireland. And my parents always respected that man for his courage. So I was given the name Paul. And a name has so much importance to it, right? It's about hopes and dreams that you have for your kid. It's the number one thing you ask someone, what's your name, right? You don't normally say, what do you do? It's what's your name? So it's really more important to us than we often realize. If we sat down and thought about it, we would realize it's even more so. And so it's a ball of humanity for a person. We have no right to replace their name with a derogatory name, which is what we see in bullying all the times in school. In fact, to the point that in schools, we'll show a picture of the Little Rock Nine, and Elizabeth Eckart is in the front, the beautiful African-American. There's this white lady behind. We've all seen the picture. She has a look of not just anger, but disdain and contempt for this black lady. And so what we do is we silhouette the Elizabeth Eckart, the black lady in the foreground, and then ask the students, hey, have you ever put someone in her shoes? And the number one thing we do, if we can pray for them in a Christian school, is say their name to yourself quietly. Say their name. This is the process of bringing the humanity back to the person that you've been harming, is to give them their name back. And the other thing we can do is you can't control what other people say, but we can control what we say. I was a varsity soccer coach for a long time, and there were times I've had to go to the referee after and said, I am sorry for, I never called anyone. It never called them any names, but I was too aggressive with them, and I had apologized from time to time for some of that. So you're not responsible for what other people say, but we are responsible for what we say, and part of that. And this is, I tell you, what's interesting. You may have seen this recently. I don't think this is getting political. John Fetterman, for example, has decided, he came out publicly and said that, I'm not going to use hyperbolic language to demonize the opposition. And I thought, wow, man, he's an interesting bird, that guy. He kind of went against things in what he said there. So he himself says, I'm going to refrain from using this kind of language because I know that it leads to hateful behavior. And one thing we can do, because obviously we're talking about a heightened political environment and social environment, but we can do, if we have a representative who is using this kind of language, we just ask them in an email, hey, would you refrain from this? I think this is dangerous, and I think it's harmful to individuals, and it's harmful to our nation.
And you talk about that in your anti-bullying programs. You're not just talking about the bully, but you're talking about the bystanders. You're talking about the people that stand by and listen to it and say it's okay. And it's and this is something that actually even got me into this space where I'm at, is that I found that within one's own tribe, people would not hold each other accountable. Now, I was at Moody, and so before I got into what I'm doing now, I was at Moody Bible Institute, and I would notice it was fine to criticize Joel Osteen. That was fine. Mm-hmm. But if I wanted to criticize somebody who was on our stage, or one of our representatives, one of our speakers, then, I would hear it, and it would be like, wait, we don't do that. We don't criticize our own. And I'm like, where did we lose as Christians? Iron sharpens irons, or the kisses of an enemy are profuse, but faithful are the wounds of a friend. I mean, where did we miss the gospel message on this? That bystanders and just like you were saying, church members need to hold their leaders accountable. Other leaders need to hold leaders accountable in their group. That's what we're really not seeing the bystanders step up. Or you know what? You might be a conservative Republican, but your buddy is calling Democrats baby killers, or your buddy is calling, making fun of the racial makeup of certain people in Congress who are Muslim or who are, that's not okay. That's not okay. We need to stand up and call to account the people in our own tribe, right?
Indeed. You reminded me of a lot of things, because I think we're of a similar spirit, where it's like we're going to say something and you kind of think it's going to be received well, but it often isn't, right? Because you're criticizing.
I know it's not going to be received well.
It's pretty rough. Yeah. I've often joked that the unforgivable sin in Scripture is being critical of your own, right? Because people just will not tolerate it. I have found for myself where it is tough to go against the crowd, but I will say sometimes, if I have the courage, I disagree with that. I don't think that's the case, and sometimes that's not inflammatory. I'm not pointing fingers necessarily, but I'm disagreeing, and most of the time, in fact, I can think pretty much all the time, it goes down well. You've said your piece, and you're not beating another person over the head with it, and you can sleep at night, right? Because you think, oh, I should have said this, I should have said that. So you have integrity. You keep your integrity. You put it out there without beating another person over the head, and sometimes maybe that's the best we can do.
Wow. Well, any other suggestions before we go? I mean, there's, I think, a lot of Christians thinking, we want to be part of the solution. We want to, in this cultural moment, say something that will further the kingdom, not further earthly kingdoms. And I really think this is a time when people are open to saying and thinking differently about what they've been doing.
Yeah, be tactful in how we speak to one another. Hold to your convictions. And for those who have, whatever reason, gone over the edge in regard to demonizing the other side and gone to this stark us versus them mentality, honestly ask yourself, one, do you really have that level of knowledge? And then two, how is that working for you? Chances are you've probably eventually you're going to isolate yourself from family members, your closest friends. It probably isn't working for you. It's working for you now because it feels so good to think that you've got these things figured out. But I can tell you in time, it doesn't work out. There is pleasure in sin for a season. Believing you're smarter than the rest of people, I think that's pretty sinful. And you're going to find yourself in a situation down the road that you didn't quite predict, you didn't think would happen, but it could happen. Now's the time to reassess how that is affecting you personally.
Well, Paul, thank you. Always an insightful conversation with you, and I appreciate your heart. Appreciate what you're doing to really bring healing and stop some of this toxicity. I mean, in the schools, the anti-bullying work you're doing is amazing. I know you always have stories to tell me about kids coming forward and confessing, but we need to confess as a body, as Christians, and come forward and begin owning stuff if we've crossed these lines. And it's okay to do. Like, we're Christians. We accept that we're fallen human beings. We accept that we have to ask for forgiveness every now and then. So I hope and pray that, and I say this for myself, like, I've been soul searching as in these past, couple of weeks, just like, Lord, what can I do to make this less? because it's easy to get caught up in the vitriol online. And so I just appreciate you, brother, and really appreciate this conversation.
Oh, well, same here. Tons of respect, Julie. Really love what you're doing.
Thank you. Well, thanks so much for watching The Roys Report, a podcast dedicated to reporting the truth and restoring the church. I'm Julie Roys. And just a quick reminder that The Roys Report is listener supported. So if you appreciate these podcasts and want them to continue, would you please consider donating to The Roys Report? To give, just go to julieroys.com/donate. That's julieroys.com/donate. Also, please subscribe to The Roys Report on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. That way, you'll never miss an episode. And while you're at it, I'd really appreciate it if you'd help us spread the word about the podcast by leaving a review. And then, please share the podcast on social media so more people can hear about this great content. Again, thanks so much for watching. Hope you were blessed and encouraged.
We need to be talking about spiritual abuse and religious trauma.
This is a place where it's safe for those who have been hurt in churches. It is also a place for people to learn more about how to respond to those situations, and it is much needed.
Walking into the room, even taking the platform today, felt so safe. There was no nerves, there was no anything. There is an atmosphere of support and camaraderie and love that's here.
I think that it's really become a kind of a refuge. It's become a green pasture for people to come find one another. And so many times there's a solace. There is a restoration just in finding someone else that's experienced what you've experienced.
To know that there are people from all over the country, all over the world, who have experienced these same things, and they're uniting in Christ for healing, and I just think it's a beautiful experience.
It's not that we don't love the church, it's actually that we do love the church very, very much. And that's why we're having these kinds of conversations. It makes me feel less alone when I can talk with someone who's had a shared experience like that.
It was so cool to see, the room is packed and folks are eager to engage. They're encouraged, but they're also encouraging one another. And I believe that this is so good because the need is so great.
This conference is not only for those who've been victimized and hurt, but it is for people who want to be the answer now to what, sadly, the church in the last 30 to 40 years has covered up. And those who want to be on the cutting edge of how God is moving to vindicate, to show his justice, to bring his healing.
I just so believe in the power of story, and we need to unite. And so I just would welcome any survivor to come and know that you will be loved, you will be heard, you will be seen, and this is just a safe place for all of us.
We celebrate what God is doing. We celebrate that those that have been hurt and wounded by the church, that there's a place that they can come that's safe, and they can find healing, and they can find community, and they can be ministered to. We celebrate that. It is so amazing. And at the same time, we grieve that, right? I mean, how sad is it that we need to have a conference for people who have been wounded by the very place, the very institution that should be ministering healing to them?